Welcome in to Inside Carolina's Game Plan podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley. Still waiting on Staple. Of course, I've got my computer volume up, and it's a little bit delayed on the YouTube channel. You guys are getting Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com sponsors. It's Christmas time, the holiday season. They're having a ton of sales. Black Friday's coming up. Get your swag at Johnny T-Shirt. Take care of them. They take care of us. Greg Barnes, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Tommy. Hope you are. Happy Thanksgiving.
Hey, it's hard to believe, bring Jason on in here. It's hard to believe that Thanksgiving and the holiday season is here. I just don't understand how time flies. It's like you get older and the days go by so much faster. I need them to slow down. And you know what's sad? We'll start this off on a funny note. I was in Publix today, Jason, and the lady at the checkout aisle, guess what she said, Greg?
Are you Tommy Ashley?
No.
I recognize that voice.
I wish. The young lady said, "Are you eligible for a senior discount?"
Oh.
Yeah. So let's go easy on me today in this podcast. I am a little bit devastated.
So let me ask this, not to be offensive. What is the age for when you can actually get a discount?
I mean, it used to be old. You know, at
Did
least
it?
55, 60. In the chat, if you could tell me when the senior discount applies. But I didn't understand what she said. I looked at my wife. I was like, what did she say? And she repeated it. And I cannot repeat what I said. But then I should have taken it. I mean, I could have saved some money. Publix is expensive. $1 stuff. Let's get into it. But yes, my any ego that I had went out the door with the young lady at Publix. So shout out to her for bringing me back to reality. Greg, North Carolina State comes on Friday. We've talked about the rivalry. We've gone over it. We've done this and that. But this is truly a game that these teams do not like each other. And it is so funny to me how it's the battle of the cultures, right? Your thoughts covering this game for as long as you have and what you saw in that regard.
Yeah, I know we make a big deal about that. And yeah, there's a little bit different culture, but I mean, pretty much everybody that goes to both schools is from the state of North Carolina. So it's not like we're talking drastic. It's not like North Carolina and Duke, for example. But even so, that adds a little bit of flavor to the rivalry. But look, I mean, if you look at kind of what this rivalry has been like the last 30 years, it's been pretty much even. And I think Chris at Dadgum Box Scores on Twitter, he does a good job. But I think he posted that I think maybe State has a lead, if I read that correctly, dating back to 1988, which is, of course, when Max started first time around. We know Max's success against the Wolfpack after he had a couple tough years there to start, and has had a ton of success outside of last year. But it's been a competitive rivalry for a long time, and that's one of the reasons it's such a heated rivalry. The fact that they do it this time of year now, which I think is a good thing. That's much better than having the Duke game here. But Dave Doran and before him Tom O'Brien, those guys really embraced kind of we're going to be the gritty team. We're going to be the more physical team. Yeah, we're the tougher program than Carolina. Whether that's true or not, most times it hasn't been, but sometimes it has been. But they've really tried to embrace that mindset, and Doran's doing that again this year for good reason. Mac doesn't play into it near as much. And, I mean, Fedora did a little bit. Butch Davis didn't care.
Butch.
Right. It was so Butch.
It reflected, too, as well.
Well, true.
He was a pro guy in a college game with that in that respect.
Right. And then John Bunning wasn't a good college coach, and yet he was, 4-2, I think, against State. So it's just funny how those things work out, but it is an intense rivalry. Carolina, of course, is on the bad end of it last year, but that's one of the great rivalry games that you can really highlight, dating back a long, long time across the country. Just a crazy close. And I know Carolina fans still have nightmares about that, but it added a chapter to this rivalry, and I think we're going to have a similar type game on Friday.
Jason, when it comes to those rivalries, I mean, obviously Florida State and Florida was a big one. It doesn't really matter who's up, who's down. I've seen Carolina destroy State. I mean, one of the ones I remember the most, 52-20 in Kenan Stadium. I remember K-Mays and those guys. I thought they were going to kill Barnett in Raleigh one year, but then State's flipped the switch, especially early in MAC 1.0. But then you come down and you have North Carolina in 19 and 20 sort of manhandle NC State, and then last year happens where Carolina manhandles them and manages to fritter it away at the end. What do you think going into this one? What's at stake here for these two programs, specifically North Carolina, of course?
Well, I mean, North Carolina is still trying to put the finishing touches on a really, really good season overall, and obviously come off a very disappointing game that pulled them out of contention for a lot for the rest of the stuff that would matter, other than an upset win in the ACC title game. But I mean, there's still a lot to play for in that respect. There's also, when Mac Brown took over, one of the things he talked about was basically regaining control of this of the state in recruiting and just in terms of being the brand program in the state. And you can't be that brand program if you're losing to your rival, half an hour away more often than not. So from Carolina's perspective, this is still about maintaining program supremacy, maintaining the sense that Carolina is on the ascent and is the big dog in state. And for NC State, it's the reverse of that. It's saying, those first couple of years under Mac were an aberration, and that Carolina is still the basketball school in the state. And if you want to come and play physical football, then you come to NC State. That's really what that's about. And so, this is the opportunity of these programs to demonstrate to future players in state sort of what those brands mean and what those programs mean. And that means a lot. And just in terms of players, I mean, you're playing against guys that you grew up with or playing against and, played with or against in all-star games and in playoffs and things like that. So these are things where you don't want to lose those games. So yeah, I think it's a rivalry game. I mean, I thought Dabo Sweeney put it really well this week. I don't know if you saw that exchange that he had with the reporter this week when the reporter was asking, why rivalries, why he takes rivalries, like South Carolina so seriously, why it's such a big deal in college football. And his response was, because I grew up in Alabama. Where'd you grow up? The guy said, I think it was Detroit, something like that. He goes, Detroit. And he goes, see, there you go. And that's it for a lot of it. I mean, you grow up in the state of North Carolina and that NC State, North Carolina matters. And, on down the list, I mean, same thing in basketball. Carolina Duke matters. Doesn't matter who's wearing what jerseys. That game matters more. So yeah, this is one you've got to be extra ready for, just because of those additional implications.
Yeah, it's always interesting to look across the country and see those different rivalries. And Greg, I'd push a little bit back on playing it at the end of the season. I kind of like it in the middle for a couple reasons. One, I just don't like it on Black Friday. If they played it on Thursday or even Thanksgiving Day, it would be better, I think. But the fact that everybody's banged up going into the game at this point in the season, there's always going to be that level of, well, if such and such played, it would have been different, on both sides or whatever. So I kind of would like to see them play earlier in the season when everybody's healthy. But it's not going to happen. So let's talk about it a little bit. Greg, you wrote an article on Inside Carolina this week that generated quite a bit of discussion. And I think it will be very relevant this week against NC State and beyond. Carolina's defense, something's got to change. And something needs to change on Saturday. what can change for this unit now? I guess 11 games in, or is it just simply like we said before? It is what it is at this point, and you just have to manage it.
I really think that's the case. I really think it is what it is. The gist of my column was really kind of centered on the fact that Mac has really kind of given the defense a pass. He's acknowledged when they've had some issues, but he hasn't roasted them like he did the offense after the game on Saturday night. And yeah, look, nobody's debating whether or not the offense played good. They did not. That's not up for discussion. And that was made quite clear after the game because Mac really got on them. And so it is that interesting dynamic of he's got a top 15 offense nationally. He's got a Heisman candidate quarterback, a Blitnikoff potential finalist at wide receiver. And yet he's much harsher on them than he is with the defense. And there could be any number of reasons why. We don't have to spend our time kind of talking about it. But I really do think you kind of have what you have. And if you can contain what NC State wants to do to give the offense the chance, that's what you've got to do. And as many 3-and-outs as you can force. But I really think that the biggest thing for the defense, and this is what hurt them more than anything last week, and this was hurt them all year long, is their inability to come up with stops in the red zone. Everybody's asking, what's different between when Gene Chizik came in 2015 and Carolina had such a great year and now? Well, it's clear as day. When you look at what teams are able to do between the 20s, then and now, it's pretty much the same. It's a little bit worse this year, but about the same. But you look at what teams were able to do in the red zone then compared to now, it's a massive change. I mean, against FBS competition, UNC is dead last in the country, 131 in red zone touchdown percentage allowed. You can't be bend but don't break when you're that. That is the epitome of breaking. It's bend and break, right? And I think that's really the key for Gene Chizik and his staff this week. Look, everybody understands significant changes have to occur this offseason, not just for what happened this year, what happened last year, and even the trend started a little bit in 2020. There's some issues there that have to be addressed. But what you can do in the meantime is, okay, we didn't do a terrible job last week outside of allowing Georgia Tech to pick up some easy first downs late in the game and allow them to have a lot of success in the red zone. If you can limit State in those areas, you're going to have a really good chance to win the game.
Yeah, it's like bend, don't break, bend but break. Like Bull Hill said, it's like dead and bloated. To reference the old great song back in the day. Jason, what has changed? I mean, what is happening in the red zone just overall? And we can really talk about both sides of the ball in the last couple of weeks. But for the defense, why is there not that success in the red zone for Gene Chizik's defense when that's been his thing? What are teams doing or able to do maybe more so this year than they've been able to do in the past or in 15, say? Is it talent? It can't be, right?
It's not talent. No, it's not talent. The biggest thing is that in the red zone, and I know there's some fans out there some listeners out there who get tired of me talking sometimes about some of my past experience here, but I have to on this one. In the red zone, it's attitude. In the red zone, it's physicality that really matter. You have to have those things in spades to be great in the red zone. Red zone teams that are good in red zone defense are teams that are physical, that play super hard, and win the line of scrimmage. Well, I mean, which of those would you say accurately characterize 2022 North Carolina's defense?
The ones you just said?
Yeah.
Greg, you got any? I didn't hear one.
Yeah, I'm still listening. I'm trying to figure out exactly.
That's the thing, is if you're looking at what's going to make what's going to win in goal line in the red zone, that's where the field shrinks. And so coaches all the time on offense, coaches all the time talk about how in the red zone, that's where you got to have a guy win. You can scheme, you can do lots of things between the 20s to smoke and mirrors your way to yardage and all of that, because teams are protecting deep. So you can run guys, if you can just keep guys honest by running guys deep, keep those safeties out of the box. You can do some things in the running game. You can use you can stretch the field and horizontally, stretch it vertically, and create space where the offense has an advantage. You get down in the red zone and it becomes a battle of manhood. It becomes a matter of that extra guy is going to be in the box. So somebody's going to have to break a tackle. Somebody's going to have to pancake somebody. Somebody's going to have to make a great throw and a great catch for this to work. And we've seen that on offense, right? On offense, when Carolina's gotten in trouble, when it's, third and 4 from the 4, well, Josh Downs is going to be one-on-one with somebody, most likely. And he's going to do something to shake open, and Drake May is going to make a great throw, and that's what you're going to get. 9 times out of 10, you're going to win that matchup. And if they decide to bracket him, then you're going to win one-on-one with, Green or somebody like that, Nesbitt, where you've got some traits advantages, and then you've got a great quarterback who's going to locate it. So you can do a lot of those things in the red zone that where you have that advantage, you can do that. Now, the problem that the offense has had is that they're a little one-dimensional there. They've not been able to really pound it into the end zone, especially since Caleb Hood got hurt. But defensively, the problem has been they're just getting beat. They're just getting beat on the line of scrimmage. And this has been the problem between the 20s. We've talked about this all year. When they've had their best games, it's when they've actually won the line of scrimmage, or at least neutralized the line of scrimmage with that defensive line. But most of the year, they've gotten beat there. They stand up. They don't play with great pad level. They don't play with a great sense of urgency and physicality on the defensive line. And if you're not doing that stuff, if you're not playing like your hair's on fire inside the 20, you're gonna lose, because the offense is gonna pound it. And look at what happened Georgia Tech down. How did Georgia Tech score those 3 times inside the red zone? And that's the thing. They scored all 3 times they were inside the red zone. How'd they do it?
Just whipped them up front.
Pounding the ball, yeah.
Yeah, they just pounded the ball a couple times with the quarterback, just quarterback run game. So you neutralize that safety in the box, and you just had guys on skates going backwards. Well, I mean, there's your answer. And this is where I go back to my days. Bobby Bowden believed so much in the importance of winning in the red zone that we had pretty much every padded practice we finished with goal line. And that was the most competitive time of every practice. Partly because if the offense scored, the defense had to run gassers after practice. And if the offense didn't score, then the offense had to run gassers after practice. So that was a freaking war, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
and it wasn't just gassers. Sometimes it's bear crawls or whatever, right? I mean, you get into the place where, like, dang it, we ain't going to be the ones to do it today. And you get stopped once. Well, there's one. There's one set that we got to do. But it's a matter of that. And and by the way, if you were the team that scored 3 and you win out of that set of 4, you might not just go to the locker room. You might stand there and talk a little bit while those guys are running. Right? That built a culture in that program of, you ain't beating us inside the red. You get inside the 10-yard line, and we are going to push you around. We are not giving up. It's, sell out. Sell out your body, whatever extra ounce of physicality you have, playing with as low a pad level as you can play to do everything possible to keep that team out of the end zone. That's what you do. I see none of that from Carolina. And that's a culture issue. That's something that, like I said, Coach Bowden built that culture, not by talking about it, but we did goal line at the end of every practice. And there were days where they would do goal line for, 20 minutes. There's one legendary practice that happened down there that was, it was like an hour of goal line. Now, I mean, you come out of that banged up, you come out of that, bruised, all that, but you also come out, a grown man that's ready to go to war in the trenches. Because that was Coach Bowden's belief, is you better be able to finish. That was a mantra for us, was finish the drill, finish. And that's something that I see as a cultural problem at Carolina. And I've seen it for years, is that overall lack of physicality and that mentality of finish and, playing nasty in that respect. And then you combine that with, playing with high pad level too often and playing with, not the best fundamentals in terms of, second step power and things like that on the defensive line. And you're going to get that problem. So to me, that answers your question.
Yeah. I mean, it comes down to simply winning the line of scrimmage and whatever it takes to get there. I think, having some injuries has made a difference, but they were not good before those injuries. I think Ray Vahasek is a guy that they miss sorely, I think. And the thing about this NC State game, Greg, is especially in 19 and then in 20 and for 58 minutes of 21, they did that to NC State for the most part. I mean, they in 19 over there and then in 21 over there, they won the line of scrimmage. They stepped up and wore State out in that area, which is, I don't know what's worse, doing it occasionally or never doing it. Because if you do it occasionally, the belief is that you can do it all the time. And that's what's maddening, Greg, about this Carolina defense. They've done it. They did it against Pittsburgh. They've done it against State. Consistency.
It is. It's the consistency aspect of it. I mean, they had a good start to the game the other night, kind of limiting what Georgia Tech. I mean, Carolina led 17-0, and then Georgia Tech, as Jason broke down the other day, they had that big little running back dump off pass over the middle that picked up 40 yards or whatever it was, and from that point forward, Georgia Tech won the line of scrimmage. So, yeah, I don't know what the mindset is. I don't know what needs to change. It's a problem that needs to be addressed, but you would hope that in this type of game on Friday, especially with what happened on Saturday night and what happened last year. I mean, that was an embarrassing loss the way it played out last year at Carter Finley, that everybody on both sides of the ball and even the special teams will be geared up and playing with adrenaline. And you hope that offsets some of the lackadaisicalness that we've seen, which, when you add in some of the technical issues, it just makes everything worse.
Yeah, there's no excuses. If they come out and repeat what happened against Georgia Tech in the second half, then,
and
there's no explanation.
And there's no question what State's going to do, right? I mean,
none.
Everybody knows what's going to take place. So can Carolina, knowing what's going to happen, can they rise to the occasion? And that's what this game is about.
Yeah, and I think State's in a very similar situation than they were. Was it 16 when Doran was basically out the door?
He was out the door if he had lost that game to Carolina.
Yeah, so, I mean, I know a lot of State fans, they wouldn't be too sad to see that happen, but they're going to come out and they're looking to spoil. Ingersoll said it in the Letterman analysis earlier this week. They're looking to spoil whatever Carolina season they had. I just think Carolina, if they're going to do it, it's like if it's ever going to happen this year, it needs to happen Friday. Let's come back after the break and talk about what is going to happen. But Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com, great friends of Inside Carolina, great friends of this podcast. Take care of them. If you're not an Inside Carolina premium subscriber, there's a great sale going on, right? 75% off. It's on the front page of Inside Carolina. You can get all Inside Carolina's premium content for cheap. Go on there, sign in. It is worth every penny. You get Don, Sherelle, basketball recruiting, football recruiting, all of Jason's breakdowns. Look, in some places, they would say Jason's breakdowns are worth the price of admission, even a movie ticket these days. He does them every week. They're great to look at, but you get so much more, and you get Inside Carolina premium message boards, and you get Johnny T-shirt 10% off. East Franklin Street in person or online at johnnytshirt.com. Take care of them. It's Christmas. Buy some swag. National Guys Pay the Bills. It's the game plan. About 9:28. We'll be right back with more. All right, boys. It is time for the what will happen session of the program here at the game plan. I kind of miss what we used to have, the Drake May session portion of the program, but Jason, I have a feeling that that'll play a big part in this. Drake May average against Georgia Tech. Josh Downs, probably, I think he'd say maybe one of his worst games ever. Is this another case of the Drake and Josh show against NC State? Because I think NC State's going to do everything they can to replicate basically what Georgia Tech did.
It needs to be the the Drake May and Josh Downs show. I mean, it certainly needs to be. It's going to be more difficult. It's easier said than done against this defense because I do think that that NC State has one of the better, if not the best, secondary in the ACC. And they've got just overall, they're a solid defense. They're pretty good up front. They're very good at the linebacker position, and then their secondary's been very good all season. They've not given up a bunch of big plays, and so you're going to have to be patient against them, just like you'd have to be patient against Georgia Tech. I mean, we talked about that before the Georgia Tech game. The Georgia Tech was pretty good on defense and had not given up a ton of big plays, and that they'd have to be patient. Well, they didn't do that the best. The concerning thing, and this is what they're going to have to deal with, is that State has some guys up front that can collapse the pocket. They've got some bigger defensive linemen. I mean, they run that 3-3 stack defense, which is different from pretty much everything else you face. That 3-3 stack, you've got to have guys that can compress and that can be big bodies against the running game and still be able to get involved in pass pressure. And I think they've got those guys. They're pretty good there. So yeah, it's going to be a challenge for this offense to really pull off. I do think that May has to play well for Carolina to win this game. I mean, just average is not going to do it from him. Even Drake May average is going to be right on the edge of what they need. They're going to need a good performance here from him and from Downs. The other thing is that they're going to need to be able to run the football against that defense just to maintain some balance, because if they're just dropping back to pass, 45, 50 times in this game and throwing into the teeth of that defense against some of the blitz looks that they're going to get and all of that with that secondary, it's going to be a tough go.
Greg, they've popped up and been able to run against NC State. Obviously, Carter and Williams in 19. In 20, they did some things. British Brooks last year went nuts against NC State. I still remember going back to the John Bunning days and Barrington Edwards.
Yeah, right.
He ran nuts against the two defensive ends that were high draft picks for NC State. I mean, Carolina's had that ability to do it. Who steps up for North Carolina on offense besides the obvious on Friday for Carolina to get it going?
Well, look, we touched on this a little bit last week, and it's applicable now, and it's going to be applicable next week. But I really think it's that offensive line for reasons that Jason just laid out. I know people kind of bang on NC State just because that's kind of a fun thing to do, and it's easy to do, right? But the defense is legit. One team has scored more than 25 points against State this year, and that was Clemson, and the Tigers scored 30. So there's no indication that this is going to be a situation where Carolina can just outscore State to where State has no chance in terms of their offensive struggles. The offense is going to have to play smart. They're going to have to be efficient. They're going to have to take advantage of their red zone opportunities, which they, of course, did not do against Georgia Tech. But listen to some of these stats for State. I mean, they're 18th nationally in third down conversion defense, 4th nationally in interceptions, 9th nationally in rushing defense, 15th in scoring defense, 15th in pass efficiency defense, and 21st in total defense. mean, this is an elite defense. I mean, it may not be Georgia good, but it's in terms of the ACC, it's right there with Pittsburgh in terms of being the best in the league. Now, let's talk about that. People say, well, Carolina scored 42 against Pittsburgh. Yes, they did. But Carolina did not run the ball effectively. Drake May had a field day throwing the ball. Had just an elite performance. And so that kind of speaks to what they're going to need. But the offensive line has to be able to provide some support, both in protecting Drake as well as helping the running backs find some space to move. If you look back at the Pitt game, Carolina was 30 carries for 86 yards, which is about 2.9 yards per carry. Not very good. But when Drake was as good as he was, you can get by with it. If Drake is not that good on Friday, that's going to be a little bit of a challenge because, Tommy, as you talked about some of these great rushing performances, I mean, Brooks is really the only one that kind of popped last year that was out of the blue. I mean, we knew what Carter and Javonte Williams could do. Barrington Edwards, we knew he had a lot of potential, and he really just popped off. He had that big run down the left seam for like 60 yards in that game in Raleigh. And so can Carolina run the ball effectively? Because if they cannot, you get into some third and medium, third and long situations. And as I just laid out, State's top 20 in the country in third down conversion defense. It's a 31.8% conversion rate. That's not where Carolina wants to be. They want to be able to be ahead of the chains. And if they have third downs, they want it to be third and short. And that gives you a lot of opportunities. And so I really think that's going to be the key is you got to establish some sort of balance. Because if State can pin their ears back and come after Drake May, that's going to be very tough. Georgia Tech did that effectively last week. That's what State's going to try to replicate, and that's what Clemson's going to try to replicate next week.
Yeah, and you mentioned, and I don't intend to call out specific players, but at right side of that line, you mentioned Spencer Rollins struggled mightily against Georgia Tech. I mean, number 6 had a season's worth of action for Georgia Tech last week. So I'm sure NC State's chomping at the bit. Who knows who plays in the linebacker core? I mean, we've heard Peyton Wilson's out. We've heard all sorts of stuff. I don't think it matters who plays for NC State on defense. Carolina's got to be a ton better. Jason, people in the chat are saying the tight ends need to show up or D.J. Jones shows up. I mean, how does Carolina mask those issues against NC State that they've had on the offensive line? I mean, Georgia Tech, you broke down the screen passes. They had a field day doing that stuff, and Carolina's defensive line at times and the linebackers and some of the backs looked like they were just, we were getting to the quarterback. Uh-oh, that guy's behind me. I mean, how does Carolina combat the same issues that NC State's going to bring?
Well, and that's an even bigger problem because NC State throws it to the running backs about as much as anybody in the country.
Yep.
So, partly because they don't have weapons outside. Their outside receivers have really not done a whole lot this year. So it's been Thayer Thomas and the running backs, and to a lesser extent some tight end stuff from State. So yeah, I mean it's going to matter a lot in terms of being able to just make sure your eyes are there, make sure whoever is responsible for the running back knows you got the dang running back. And you stay under control because they're probably releasing that guy. Odds are they're not keeping him in the backfield since he's one of their core pass catchers. You got to know that even if the blitz calls for you to get in the backfield, you've got to make sure that you handle your responsibility of taking care of the back out of the backfield. So a lot of that stuff I think is going to be critical on that side of the ball. Now on the other side of the ball, I think again. You mentioned Rollins had a rough outing. I think part of that was the quality of the player that was that was coming across the line of scrimmage from him. I think he's one of the best defensive linemen in the conference, even though he does play for Georgia Tech. And ultimately, it was just physicality that was a problem there. They're going to have to be able to, you mentioned, and the comment mentioned tight ends. Wouldn't hurt. I mean, I think that it's worth noting that despite losing that game, I mean, I'm looking at the rushing defense logs for NC State this year, and you look through this, and their rush defense is one of the best in the country, without question. I mean, they're giving up 3.61 yards per carry, which is really good. But if you look at this, there were basically two teams that were able to run the football against him. Syracuse ran for 5.97 yards per carry, and Florida State, even though they lost that game and really shouldn't have lost that game, averaged 7.36 yards per carry. Watch those tapes. Go back and take a look at what they did. And actually, the thing that Florida State did in that game is they used some of the versatility they had personnel wise to run a lot of nub sets and reduced sets with their big wide receiver. They got a 6'7" wide receiver, who's about 6'7", 230, and they'd split him to the short side of the field. But they did a lot of nub with a tight end on the line of scrimmage as the only receiver to that side of the field. When you do that against the 3-3 stack defense, you force them to match up in ways that are uncomfortable for them. If I'm Carolina, run a lot of 3x1 sets and some nub sets and things like that in this game, and that does make the tight end a significant player in this. Just because I think you can get some numbers things against their 3-3 to be able to block up the run really well. So that's something I would do, because I think if you look at the games that they've struggled in, it's games where they've not run the ball quite as well, and when teams have run the ball against them. And I think that's going to be critical here. So yeah, if you're talking about what I would do in term, and also what is most important defensively, make sure you know who's got the back and make sure that guy has his eyes in the right spot. Offensively, I'd go with some less balanced, less 2x2, two receivers on each side of the center, less 2x2, more unbalanced type looks and some nub type sets to cause some discomfort for their defense up front and in their stack system, and see if I can make sure I can get some numbers in the run game, especially with some gap runs, counter power, that sort of thing.
Greg Slagle asks, you read off a bunch of stats. Slagle asks, where is State's defense vulnerable? Looking at all those stats you have on State's defense, where can Carolina have some success that maybe the numbers suggest? Is there anything in the numbers that shows, well, Carolina can attack this with the offense?
Well, they've been, as Jason said, and we've talked about, they're really good against the run. And I don't think that's necessarily a strength of Carolina's when Drake May is such a prominent piece of that. But State has given up passing yards. And one of the reasons their pass efficiency defense is so good is they have been opportunistic. They do have those 16 interceptions. Drake has been pretty clean, though, in his accuracy, and hasn't kind of been caught with some really poor passes, as much as you might think for a redshirt freshman. So I think there's opportunities down the field, and if he's willing to take kind of what State gives him. This is why it's so important for Carolina to have some semblance of a running game. It doesn't have to be great. It just has to be somewhat effective so that Carolina's not playing from behind the chains so much. And if you can get into 2nd and 7 and 3rd and 4 and 5, that makes it a lot easier because State has to defend two different looks then, right? The run and the pass. And that's going to create some opportunities for Drake May to have some success. Somehow had success last year a bit against this defense. So I think that's really where it is. But it starts up front. It starts up front with that offensive line and the run game existing. And as long as that happens, Drake and Josh Downs, and we haven't mentioned Antoine Green. If he's actually back this week, that really helps that offense, especially vertical passing game. And you may see some deep shots down the field.
And use some counter and some gap runs to try to get the edge on them, because they do run a lot of tight front. So that's zero technique right over the center, and then a lot of guys lined up on or just on the inside eye of the offensive tackle. What you want to do is use some pulls and things to get those guys kind of pushed inside, and then if you can get the puller up on the edge there to up against the backer on that second level, and you can just kind of push that edge guy and the nose tackle together, you can get some favorable matchups on the edge against them. Your back's going to have to win against somebody who can tackle, but you're going to have some opportunities. And if you can get that, you can get some big plays in the run game. So to me, I'm running, it's a play called G, or some teams call down. I'm running that a lot in this game, where you block down with the play side offensive tackle and you pull the play side guard around him, and you can get that guard one-on-one against the backer. And then your back basically just has to make one guy miss on the edge. You've got some really, really good numbers if you do that. They've shown some trouble against some counter on the edge as well in the couple games that they struggled against teams that could run the football, especially against faster backs. So this is a good matchup for 21 for Carolina. If they can get him on the edge with some of those counter runs and some of the gap type runs, you can run the football in this team, but you have to really execute it well, and you got to have a back that can win in the open field some.
Yeah, and Tommy, last week, I think Georgia Tech kind of gives you a good example of this. Carolina had 201 non-sack rushing yards. Only 13 of those came in between the tackles. So Carolina had success. Granted, when Elijah Green's running for an 80-yard touchdown, that helps the stats a little bit. But they had their success on the edge. So if they can duplicate that this week, that will be beneficial as Jason lays out there.
Yeah, a ton of comments in there. Even got our resident State fan in there. What's going on, Brent? Nice to see you join us. Relevant this week, so we'd love to have you. When I watch Carolina, and let me ask this, and then I want to move to predictions, because quite frankly, we could talk about it all show. Who knows what's actually going to happen on Friday? I think y'all are right on the running game. Carolina had success with that in the past. I think State's linebackers are good. But anyway, Jeff asked, are the new chrome helmets nice? Do we think they're nice? Do you like those, Greg? Chrome helmets?
Not really, but I'm getting old. I'm approaching the senior citizen age, like we talked about earlier, Tommy. I'm more of a traditionalist. Look, I've said it a bunch. I'll continue to say it. I love what UCLA and USC did last week. I think it's a great look. I wish State and Carolina did it every year. NC State red, Carolina blue. I think it's a great look. That's going to be my vote every single year.
Yeah, they did it once in basketball. It was at State too, wasn't it?
And they did it. They did it once in football, but only one time.
Yeah, but I'm not a huge fan of these chromes. I don't know. They don't look right.
The reason they don't look right is they're not on brand.
Well, yeah, you went off about that after
that's the thing. I mean, Carolina is Carolina. You gotta. Any alternate should still look like Carolina. And to me, chrome looks pretty generic. You could put the chrome lids on just about any team and look, it's an alternate lid. And it's like, yeah. And 17 other teams have used the exact same color chrome this year. Like, what are you trying to pull? To me, shine up a Carolina blue helmet, do something. You can chrome up Carolina blue. You can do some things to get a little bit of a different look from that. But if you are going to wear those, there needs to be a lot of Carolina blue prominently featured in the uniform. You can't go say chrome and then white on white, that sort of thing.
Well, they are chrome and all blue this week. At least that's what they put out.
You have to do that. But if you've got a really classy, really good helmet already, in general, I think it's better to stick with stuff that looks a lot like that. So, if you're gonna do an alternate, do the Tar Heel or a Ram decal difference on the standard helmet rather than going with something chrome. But again, I'm a man. I'm 40. So what do I know?
It's interesting take. I was going to ask a question. Quite frankly, I forgot. Oh, did Georgia Tech do anything differently to prevent Drake from running, Jason? That's the question people asking in the chat. Did they spy him? Did you see anything other than just collapse the pocket on top of him? Most
they did spy him some, but they didn't do it a ton. what they really did is they did a great job of staying in their rush lanes and compressing it. And it helps that they're bigger bodies. I mean, Georgia Tech's defensive line is not a bunch of small speed rushers. And you mentioned 6 for them. He's the guy that gave Rollins and the rest the most trouble. And, he's about a 280-pound defensive end. I mean, he's a big dude. That guy's going to be a draft pick. He's going to play in the NFL, and he's going to play for a while. And he was able to compress the pocket without losing his rush lane. And they were really disciplined with their defensive tackles staying in their lanes, and then the guys on the edge compressed rather than getting upfield. And then periodically they did have a spy on certain downs where they felt like it was you look at 3rd and 6 or something like that. They potentially have an additional spy that would be on the inside, so that if he did kind of break into a lane that he'd be there. But for the most part, it was just that they compressed the pocket instead of getting upfield, and just they were going to force him not to be able to slide to the right or the left like he does, or to be able to escape the pocket to the right or the left where he gets really dangerous throwing on the run, and then minimize how big those rush lanes are when he does step up in the pocket. They wanted him to have to step up in the pocket to his 2nd and 3rd read and make those throws from the pocket. And he never was really comfortable with that in that game. That's what they did. And I think that's what we're going to see the next 2 games, and he's going to have to grow there.
Yeah, let's talk about some predictions while we get out of here. Again, we didn't really talk NC State. I've heard a little birdie said a certain quarterback is practicing this week. I've heard it's Finley. I've heard it's Chambers. I've heard it's Morris. Good luck to Gene Chizik. I asked him about preparing for different quarterbacks on Monday, and it's going to be a challenge for North Carolina. Bottom line is, like we said early, I think where that matters is they got to come out and play with physicality across the board, no matter who is slinging it or running it for NC State. So, Greg, how's this game shake out? And it could be wet. People are concerned about the rain. There was some slippage going on against Georgia Tech, and it was dry out there. But it's football. Got to play in the rain, snow, sleet. Used to be the mud. But, Greg, how's it shake out?
Tropical storms.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, it's not going to be maybe wet. It's not going to be cold. So I think, that may help State a little bit. I don't know. I really think State is going to try to run the ball, have some success, throw to the backs a little bit, try to score points that way. They got a great field goal kicker, and then just try to play great defensively and limit what Drake May and that offense can do. Very similar to what Georgia Tech does, but I think State has a good bit better defense than Georgia Tech did. Offensively, I mean, God, I didn't give Georgia Tech much credit at all last week, and I think for good reason. So I'm going to bite my tongue a little bit about NC State. Now, if MJ Morris plays, that's a big change, because I think he's got some talent even though he's young. I don't know about Finley and Chambers. I haven't seen much out of either of those guys. But State's defense is holding teams to 18.7 points. Since Leary went out, State's scoring 18.2. So it's going to be a low-scoring game for North Carolina. But I think Drake May is going to bounce back. We haven't really seen him have to play after a bad week. I think Josh Downs has something to prove after that drop late. And I think the offensive line feels the same way. And so I think North Carolina's offense does just enough. And I'm counting on MJ Morris not playing. So I've got Carolina winning this one to get to 10 wins, which I think is a great season. But I got Carolina winning this one 24-17.
A low-scoring game indeed. You got the defense holding NC State to 17?
At some point, it's got to work, right? I mean, look, I don't know what else to say, Tommy.
Jason, I was looking at the 2020. Ben Finley was 13 for 20 for 143 with a rating of 44.6. And Kenan, same guy, right? It's the same guy. I hadn't seen him much since. He threw a ton of passes against Louisville. Like I said, it doesn't matter who plays quarterback from State. Morris changes the game a little bit, but the bottom line is Carolina's got to be engaged more than they have all year. What happens, Jason?
So I'm looking at NC State's rush offense. And, this is the thing that if Carolina is going to have a ton of problems on defense, it starts there. Are you facing a team that's really been able to run the football? What do you think? Now, Greg, you probably already know this, but what do you think the average yards per carry for NC State, for the NC State rushing offense is against Power 5 opponents this year?
I don't have it in front of me. It's got to be like 3.5.
Tommy?
Less. I go under.
2.99 yards per carry.
Whew.
Right? That's no bueno, right? That's not strong. They've struggled to run the football this year. I mean, last week against Louisville, 2.48 yards per carry. Against Wake Forest, 2.8 yards per carry. Virginia Tech, 1.76 yards per carry. Syracuse, 2.5 yards per carry. Those are their games. The only one that they've had success in was against Boston College, 4.55 yards per carry. So,
and
given
Grant
that,
Gibson, I mean, he's their best offensive lineman. He's not expected to play on Friday.
Yeah. So given that they're against Power 5 defenses, averaging 2.99 yards per carry, and then 4.65 yards per carry against non-Power 5, I figure, against Carolina's defense, they'll average around 4.5.
Damn.
So, but that's not a ton. That's not, a situation where they're coming in averaging 4.5 and then they'll get 6. So I think that does make a difference. And so I'm going to project a little bit lower score than what you might get, similar to what Greg did against other teams. So I think when it comes down to it with this sort of game, I tend to default to the line of scrimmage and to the quarterback position, right? We've talked about this a lot, especially in rivalry games. Give me the team that's going to probably win the line of scrimmage and that's going to have a better quarterback. And I think NC State so far on the year has been better on the line of scrimmage, but not by a ton because their offensive line hasn't been great. But then you go to the quarterback position and Carolina has a little advantage there.
A little bit. Carolina scored 30 points last year, 48 the year before, 41 the year before that. I think this is a game that Mac Brown wants. I think this is a game that if they didn't learn a lesson against Georgia Tech, they never will. I think Drake May and Josh Downs bounce back.
I agree. And that's what I'm coming to. So I think they'll give up, they'll give up more points than State scored against other teams, I'm sure, but they're still going to score some points in this game with Drake May. So I'm going to go with Carolina to win this game. I'm going to go with a little higher score than Greg did. I'm going to go with 34-27. Carolina winning this. I think this is one of those kitchen sink games. So, you bring in some extra stuff and a trick play here. Thayer Thomas can throw now. Don't forget that.
He's thrown 13 passes, 4 touchdown passes.
Yeah, so this is one of those games where you better tell your defense to be ready for any double pass, for all sorts of little trickeration. And on offense, you're going to have your own wrinkles. And so I think there's going to be a few extra plays there. I've got Carolina winning at 34-27. It's about a 60-40, 65-35 type game for me.
Thayer Thomas, no Quinshad Davis, Greg. What's Quinshad Davis's QBR at Carolina? Like 2,000?
Yeah, it's
4 for 4 with 4 touchdowns.
And by the way, on a damp game, the fact that Drake May has huge hands is a major help.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think wet. I think cold is a factor. I don't know if wet's as much a factor, unless it's just monsoon. You mentioned the monsoon game, the Virginia Tech game, where it looked like nobody had ever played football for Carolina.
A wet field is an advantage for the offense as long as the quarterback can hold on to the football, because the receivers, the offensive players know where they're going, and you can set that up. And if it's a little bit slick, that actually is a disadvantage for the guy who doesn't know where he's going.
It'll be a dogfight. I learned my lesson last week talking about Georgia Tech and how bad they were, and worrying about who was playing quarterback doesn't matter. Carolina, it is a Carolina game here, and Carolina's got to play. I picked them to win in the preseason. I'm going to pick them to win now. I have no idea what the score is. I tend to think it's going to be close. But for some reason, I think Carolina might put up 38 or 41 points, but I would suspect State will figure out how to put up 30 at least in the 30s. I'll go Carolina 41-36 in another one of those.
Good gracious,
Man, there would have look you have the kind of down the stretch performance with that on defense, and there would need to be some changes, man.
There needs to be parking lot changes.
I'm not saying parking lot changes because I just don't think that at this stage of the year that matters. But you give up 36 points to this NC State team in the current condition that it's in, and you're notifying you're already firing up the Rolodex for the offseason.
Interesting take.
18.2 points per game since Devin Leary got hurt.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what anybody else did. It's Carolina State. Throw the record books out. I just know that this game is as big as a lot for the fan base. We could talk about whatever about happens next week, but I think NC State, especially after Georgia Tech, especially after last year in Raleigh, this game is big for the fan base. Just look. I mean, look at the live people. Shout out to the 160 that are in here now. You guys are awesome. There's no fair weather in you guys. You show up no matter what. But the fans need to be in Kenan Stadium, and Mac Brown needs to have his team ready. Spin the Game Plan podcast, North Carolina State versus North Carolina, 3:30. It's an ABC game, Kenan Stadium. We'll all be there. Come see us in the Bowls lot. If you haven't subscribe to the YouTube channel. Let me get this bot out of here before I wrap up. Can y'all see that?
Yep.
It's ridiculous. It's sad.
It's the Carolina game right after the USA World Cup game.
Yep. So there's a ton to watch on Carolina, but you can watch it on your phone. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Rate, review, subscribe. Shop Johnny T-shirt. Subscribe on YouTube. What else have I missed? Anything?
I set up a Go Heels Go America for you, but you missed that chance.
I can't say that on air. I can't say the Go Heels part. It'll give me trouble. GoHeels.com, but InsideCarolina.com is the place to get your stuff. Carolina basketball, all that stuff. We got a ton of information, ton of stuff. I'm rambling. It's time to go, boys. Happy Thanksgiving.